Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this month's IGRI research seminar presentation. Davor's on vacation this week. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Uta Brady. I'm a postdoc at Arizona State University, and I'm also IGRI's associate director. I used to host these seminars, so I'm excited to be back and see so many of you here. It's a great day. Before we get started, just a quick couple of IGRI updates in case you don't know. So we have a virtual conference that's coming up. Abstract submission is closed, but people can still participate. It's open for online participation, and it's on June 5th through 7th, all online. So if you wanted to register to participate and see the presentations, you're obviously welcome. So we encourage you to do that, and I'll put the link into chat once the presentation starts. And our speaker today is Sola Kim from Arizona State University. She's a grad student there, and she also participated in our grad student workshop last year, and I'm really excited to see how her work has advanced since then. She's going to be presenting her work on decoding institutional dynamics on climate change adaptation in southern South Korea. And so she basically uses the IG to explore climate change adaptation policies in the context of seaweed aquaculture and coastal ecosystem management. And she also uses the coupled infrastructure systems network. So she combines the two, which is really interesting. So I'm going to give Sola the floor and let her present.
Okay. Is it okay? Yeah, cool.
Yes, perfect.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Sola Kim. I'm a PhD student in sustainability at Arizona State University. I'm excited to share my research on climate change adaptation policies in South Korea, with a focus on synergy between coupled infrastructure systems and institutional grammar. Also, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Siddiqui, Franz, and Brady for their invaluable guidance during last year's IGRI Doctor Workshop in Denver. And yeah, their assistance was very crucial and when applying IG to create climate change adaptation policies, and I'm eager to share our findings with you. So please note that this is an ongoing research project and there may be areas for improvements. So I welcome your questions and feedback at any point during the presentation. Okay, let's begin. Before we dive into the details, let me give you a brief overview of what we will cover in today. Our discussion will be structured into 6 main sections: background, framework, data and method, key findings, discussion relate to seaweed aquaculture policies in South Korea, and conclusion. Let's start it with the background section. South Korea is definitely feeling of the effects of climate change a lot. Just recently, the southern part of the country experienced a severe water shortage due to an intense drought. This has been the longest and most severe drought they have faced in over a year. The fisheries in Korea are certainly not exempt from these changes either. In addition to rising sea levels, the ocean temperature has been increasing at a remarkable rate throughout history. So while I was doing my research, I found this interesting survey from 2022 in South Korea. It targeted farmers, fishermen, and outdoor workers. Those people are really vulnerable to climate change. Their responses only from 50 fishermen, which isn't a huge number, but the results are pretty fascinating. They were asked, how interested are you in the issue of climate change? And here's what they said. 46% were really interested. 42% were somewhat interested, and 14% just weren't that into it. So they were also asked, how serious do you think climate change is? Most of fishermen thought that it's extremely serious. Then 34 said it's moderate, and just 1% think this isn't a big deal. But here's something really mind-blowing. They were asked, in climate change related events such as public hearings, signing petitions, attending rallies or protests, even though the majority of them thought climate change is severe, 82% of them have never participated in any climate change related events. It's quite surprising. So I found myself curious about how these individuals who don't actually participate in climate change related events expect the issue to be addressed. To explore this further, the survey asked, how do you evaluate the South Korean government's climate change response policies? The results were quite interesting. 68% of respondents believe that the policies are not effective, while 32% think otherwise. It is important to consider their perspectives. On one hand, we have people who are interested in climate change, recognize its seriousness, and actively participate in related events. However, they are not fully satisfied with the government's policies. It's possible that some of these less active individuals may actually agree with the government's policies, and that's why they don't participate in as much. On the other hand, we have those who are less involved in the issue, believe the government's policies are not effective, but do not protest or participate in the event. So it's a fascinating dynamic, and understanding these differing perspectives can shed light on the complexities of climate change policy in South Korea. So after reviewing the survey results from these fishermen, 50 fishermen, I was reminded of something that might not immediately come to mind when discussing climate change. It's seaweed aquaculture system in South Korea. You might be wondering how seaweed is related to climate change, but trust me, it plays a significant role in Korean life. For example, we eat seaweed soup when a woman gives birth, and we eat seaweed soup on every birthday. And dried seaweed, this one is a common part of our meals. And beyond its cultural significance, seaweed is also essential for our natural environment with these several reasons. But unfortunately, seaweed is not immune to climate change impact. Various research studies have identified numerous ways in which seaweed is affected from climate change. So I selected the study areas based on their seaweed aquaculture production levels in South Korea. You'll see these locations mentioned frequently throughout the presentation. So as I delved deeper into this topic, I became curious about how various regions manage climate change at their own pace with their own policy strategies, given the differing environments they are situated in. This is particularly interesting in context of seaweed aquaculture, as most seaweed is produced throughout the aquaculture systems. So the production of seaweed might be influenced by factors such as the degree of climate change, sea level rise, and temperature fluctuations. Building upon the information we've discussed so far, the research question I formulated for this study is as follows. How does each local institutional design and natural infrastructure influence interactions between resource users and the system's capacity for robust climate change adaptation? Now that we've set the stage for the research context, let's proceed to discuss the framework that underpins this study. Before we dive into the research framework, let's first get familiar with the structure of climate change adaptation policies in South Korea. You might be wondering why I am focusing on climate change adaptation instead of mitigation or even both. Well, adaptation is all about preparing for and responding to the effects of climate change that are already happening or expected in the future, while mitigation aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow down the rate and magnitude of climate change. Now, let's take a look at the policy structure. The Framework Act and Decree Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth for Coping with Climate Crisis, it's a long name, play a central role here. Based on this, each province and city creates their own local ordinances, which are then followed by counties here. These ordinances are made by elected officials, such as National Assembly members and local councils. And the government and its ministries develop national level adaptation measures. And based on these guidelines, each province creates their own measures and so on. And the public officials are responsible for developing these measures, and all these activities are monitored and audited by a committee. In this slide, I'd like to introduce the coupled infrastructure system applied to South Korea's seaweed aquaculture system, which consists of 4 major components. First, research users are primary residents of each region, including those involved in aquaculture. They benefit from using and exploiting the resources. Second one is natural infrastructure or resource system, comprises seaweed and related marine resources, which interact with environment and human behaviors. Third one is public infrastructure, includes public officials, committees, and public corporations responsible for creating and implementing policies. Finally, public infrastructure providers are mainly elected officials, such as mayors, governors, or local councils, who have the authority to establish rules and ensure that other entities comply with them. But there are some pros and cons of the CIS framework here. On one hand, CIS primarily emphasizes the structural components of system and their interdependencies. On the one hand, CIS lacks granularity in understanding institutional aspects, as it doesn't offer a detailed insights into the rules, norms, and decision-making processes that govern the behavior of actors within these systems. So Anders et al. 2019 made an effort to address some of the limitations that CIS present by outlining detailed verbs lists among CIS entities. These figures you see here demonstrate how each CIS interacts with other CIS entities and the relationship they form. However, we still face some limitations with this, like figuring out which verbs are truly crucial among these interactions and understanding how these relationships can be identified in similar policy environments, but with differing natural settings. Furthermore, another challenge we face is that we don't have a clear understanding the specific groups or individuals that exist within the CIS entities themselves. This makes it even more crucial to dive deeper into these interactions and relationships for a more comprehensive understanding of the system. My research takes inspiration from this article as a guiding example. So this is where IG institutional grammar comes into play, acting as a complementary tool. You see, IG is useful for analyzing, deciphering the underlying rules and norms that shape stakeholder interactions and decision-making process within a system. By combining the strengths of CIS and IGRI, as researchers can gain a more comprehensive understanding of complex system dynamics, considering not only structural components, but also institutional aspects guiding stakeholder behavior. This powerful combination can offer a valuable insight for creating more effective and adaptive policymaking processes, especially when tackling challenges like climate change. But unlike the former researches, I want to talk about IG 2.0 and institutional play. IG 2.0 aims to capture the institutional arrangement more comprehensively. It does so by including both regulative syntax, which expresses behavior expectations, and constitutive syntax that reflects the parameterization of the system by defining entities in the first place. In contrast, IG 1.0 focused primarily on behavior regulation only. One key feature in IG 2.0 is the concept of institutional play. Now, this is pretty important because it's all about how the institutional setting is defined and how actors interact based on the rules and norms in place. What's great about this concept is that it shows institutional arrangements aren't set in stone. They can change over time because of actions taken by actors, feedback effects, and new arrangements emerging. By looking at these interactions, we can learn how these arrangements evolve and adapt to different situations. Another cool thing about institutional play is that it underlies the significance of feedback effect. When we take into account how the actions of actors can influence the larger institutional setting, we can get a better grasp of how effective, adaptable these arrangements are. This knowledge can help us create arrangements that can withstand new challenges and changes. All right, so now let's move on to the data and method section. As you might have noticed earlier, we are going to focus on the provincial level here and local ordinances and their adaptation measures in this research. So in our study, we have gathered 5 distinct local ordinances from the regions we are focusing on as our primary data sources. And these ordinances, which consist of 598 lines, are based on the Framework Act here. We got them from online databases. And unfortunately, since the raw data is in Korean, we took on the task of translating it into English, and to make sure everything's accurate, consistent, we had a bilingual speaker, bilingual Korean English speaker carefully review and verify the translated content. So in addition to ordinances, we are also examining the actual policy documents here. Based on the Article 40 of the Framework Act, mayors, governors need to develop and implement climate crisis adaptation measures for their districts every 5 years, considering both the recommended adaptation measures and the specific characteristics of each region. Keeping this in mind, we've gathered policy documents from 5 different regions, which concentrate on their climate change adaptation strategy for 2 timeframes, 2017 to 2021 and 2022 to 2026. All right, so the timeline goes like this. Adaptation measures were initially developed before the framework here in 2016. Then the Framework Act was established in 2021, which led to creation of local ordinances that same year. Finally, the new adaptation measures were developed, targeting the period from 2022 to 2026. All right, so let's discuss some key aspects of our method. We mainly focused on regulative statements, as we found that most constitutive statements in the ordinances were related to general affairs like scheduling meetings or something like that. And they were very, very similar across all our research scope. To ensure reliability of our findings, we applied test-retest method as suggested by Dr. Brady here in 2023. We also utilize IG logical to better understand the complexities of institutional arrangement. By assigning roles of attributes to CIS actors such as PIPs and PIs, RUs, etc., we are able to create a role taxonomy, which helped us identify the essential components of the system. We also realized the significance of deontic words such as shall, endeavor to, can, may, and in the IG coding process, further enhancing our analysis. For conducting the IG coding, we use the Kano environment here. And to visualize the result, we utilize Python language. Before we delve into key findings, it's imperative to recall the geographical scope of this research. Understanding this is crucial to comprehend the key findings accurately. All right, let's take a closer look at the results of our IG coding and visualization using Python. As you can see on the screen, each node or CIS entity has a different size here, and the strength of their edges varies as well. Let's dive deeper into the details of the graph and focus on Chungnam first. When we examine the graph, we can see that nodes representing CIS entities in Chungnam are relatively smaller in size compared to other regions. The size of each node indicates the connection with other nodes. This suggests that the presence of CIS entities in Chungnam may not be as strong as in other regions. In particular, we can observe that PIP and PI nodes are of similar size, indicating a balance between the number of primary and second primary CIS entities in the region. Now take a closer look at the red bars here. Connect the nodes in the graph. These bars represent the level of connection or strengths of relationship between CIS entities. In the case of Chungnam, we can see that the level of connection between nodes relatively low. Additionally, the silver dotted lines that we see in the graph indicate that there are no connections between certain nodes at all. Of course, this may change if we consider the rules in use, but in terms of the rules in form, we cannot identify any connection between these nodes. So as you zoom in here, we can see that there are different groups of actors that are interconnected within the network. Specifically, we can observe that there are resource users here, residents, public infrastructure providers here, governors, and the public infrastructure within the system, province here. When we analyze the network, we can see that one of the PIPs, namely the governor, is at the center of the connection within the system. This indicates that the governor is a crucial actor within the network and may play a crucial role in coordinating, managing various actors involved in the system. However, it is worth noting that there are also overlaps between different actors within the network. This suggests that there are a slight level of interconnectedness between the actors, which may lead to more collaborated and cohesive system compared to non-interconnectedness system. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge that there are many actors involved in the system, which make it difficult to identify. The system is polycentric, meaning that this system has single center here of power and decision-making. Right, let's shift our focus to Gyeongnam. When we examine the graph, we can see that Gyeongnam has relatively larger PIP nodes and smaller RU nodes compared to Chungnam. Interestingly, we can observe that there is no connection between PI and NI within the network. This indicates that there may be some fragmentation or lack of cooperation between public infrastructure and natural infrastructure in the region. On the one hand, we can see that connection between PIP and PI is relatively stronger than Chungnam. This may suggest that governor or other primary CI entities play a crucial role in coordinating, managing the different actors involved in the system. Upon conducting network analysis, we can also note that this system appears to be hierarchical in nature, with a focus on the PIPs, the governor. This suggests the governor may be a key decision maker here as well. So let's take a closer look at the Jeonbuk. As we examine the graph, we can see that Jeonbuk has a significantly larger PIP node compared to other regions we've discussed so far. When we conduct network analysis of Jeonbuk, we can see that the system is remarkably hierarchical in nature. This suggests that PIP has a high level of influence and decision-making power within the system. Let's now turn our attention to Jeonnam, a region located in southwest. This is a very beautiful place. When we look at the graph, we can see that Jeonnam has the largest PIP node among the other regions we've discussed. As we conduct network analysis here, we can see that it's also hierarchical. Additionally, we can observe that PIP is highly connected to the PIP node. Interestingly, you can see that there is a significant edge labeled as 5A here, which implies the presence of spillover between RU and NI. In this research, we consider climate change or increasing carbon emissions as a form of spillover between resource users and natural infrastructure. As we look closer at the graph, we can see that PI nodes are highly connected with this spillover edge. This suggests that public infrastructure needs to cope with, expand, and support this spillover, which may have important implications for managing and mitigating the impact of climate change in this region. Lastly, let's discuss Busan. This is the second largest city in South Korea. We can see that Busan has the largest PI node among other regions we've discussed. This suggests that PI may play a particularly significant role in this region. PIP is big as well. And for the network analysis, we can see that this one is also hierarchical, focusing on mayor here, the PIP. So to summarize our key findings on the CIS network analysis, we can see that each region has its own unique connections and size of nodes within the system. However, one common characteristic across all regions is the dominance of PIP nodes here, indicating a strong presence of primary CIS entities such as the governor or elected officials. Additionally, we observed the hierarchical pattern in connection between PIP, PI here across all regions. This suggests that primary CIS entities may play a crucial role in the system. Interestingly, we found that connection to climate change related issues varied across all different regions. Moreover, we noticed that natural infrastructure here and resource users here were not the main focus of this analysis. Okay, and let's now shift our focus to Sankey diagram here, which illustrates the linkages between different components of CIS entities. and the genetic level of genetic level of their relationships. As you can see from the red legend on the diagram, we can differentiate it between different genetic values such as shell individual, can, may. Interestingly, we can observe that most of the connections between PIP and PI nodes are labeled with may here, grade 1, indicating a lower level of obligation or voluntariness in their relationships. However, when we look into PI here, these things here, we can see that most of their connections are labeled with shell. This blue one, and this one indicates that a higher level of obligation or a mandatory requirement in their relationships. This suggests that public infrastructure in the region may have a greater responsibility and duty to fulfill their roles in the CI entities. So you may wonder why there are many connections starting, why there are not many connections starting from RU here. This is due to the limitation of local ordinances, which must follow the guidelines of Framework Act for climate change adaptation policies. Unless the Framework Act specifies otherwise, local ordinances cannot assign any responsibilities or duty to resource users. So overall, this diagram gives us better understanding of linkages and genetic values between different components of the CIS entities in the regions. Okay, so why are all of these things we've been discussing related to seaweed aquaculture and marine resource management? Let's now discuss timeline that we presented earlier. After conducting the CIS and IG analysis, we wanted to gather policy information that directly relates to seaweed aquaculture and marine ecosystem management. By examining the local ordinances, policies relate to these areas, we wanted to better understand how the different CIS connections we observed in our analysis are related to actual policy implementation and regulation. Our analysis has shown significant variance in the size of nodes and connectivity of edges, specifically when you observe the certain regions such as Jeonbuk, Jeonnam, and Busan have larger PIP nodes here, indicating a more prominent role of public infrastructure providers in the decision-making processes related to seaweed aquaculture policy. This may suggest a more centralized approach to policy formulation and implementation, which could have implication for the effectiveness and responsiveness of policies to local needs and conditions. Let's delve into the implications for our research. We can look at the policy effectiveness here, which is the degree to which policies achieve their intended goals, such as increasing seaweed production, ecosystem health, reducing vulnerability to climate change. And another important aspect is policy responsiveness, which refers to ability of policy and framework to adapt to emerging challenges or change in circumstances. This could include many different things, such as environmental conditions here. So understanding these implications can help us evaluate the overall success of the policies in place, as well as identify areas for improvement or adjustment to ensure continued progress in the face of evolving challenges. All right, let's look at this slide showing the trends in shallow seafood aquaculture production volume. Unfortunately, we couldn't gather data specifically for seaweed aquaculture by region. However, as you can see from the chart, Jeonnam stands out, this gray one, as the dominant producer among all the regions. So even though we can observe increasing trend in the production volume, it is important to note that the number of households, the green one here, involved in seaweed aquaculture has actually been declining. Interestingly, this decrease was particularly noticeable during the COVID-19 pandemic here. and household earnings declined as well. This decrease might be attributed to the market decline caused by the pandemic, maybe, but we need to examine further data to better understand the policy effectiveness in the future. So in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the policy, we also gather the vulnerability assessment data for region under RCP 8.5 scenario. 8.5 scenario is referred to as business as usual scenario, as you know. This particular assessment focused only on the impact of marine ecosystem under this scenario for each region. But interesting is that we can see that the results show slight increases or slight decreases here. However, we do need to exercise caution in interpreting these findings because the weights of each factor might be different. And this one is collected from the policy documents that I mentioned before, and it might be entirely appropriate to, it might not be entirely appropriate to compare them directly. All right, now let's shift our focus to policy responsiveness. Now, if you look at this chart here, you can see the proportion of the budget allocated to seaweed aquaculture for each region. As we anticipated, Jeonnam is leading the way, likely due to its high production rate, maybe. However, quite interestingly, all the regions except for Busan saw a decrease in their budget proportion in 2022 to 2026. So it's definitely something we need to keep an eye on as we move forward. Moving on this next chart, there's something else that we should take note of. Not only did the budget allocated for seaweed aquaculture, we also observed a significant drop in the total budget for a climate change adaptation policy between the two periods. This is definitely a trend that warrants further examination and discussion as we consider the potential implication for climate change adaptation efforts. And so we actually found the reason for this trend. As you can see in the chart, the national budget for climate change adaptation was cut by more than 50% here. So why did this happen? Interestingly, Busan's budget allocation for seaweed aquaculture didn't see the same impact as other regions, and the proportion actually remained stable or even increased. The reason for this difference can be found on the right side of the slide, where you can see that Busan has a relatively stable fiscal autonomy. This likely played a role in allowing them maintain or even boost their budget for seaweed aquaculture amid the broader budget cuts. So let's quickly summarize our main findings in discussion. First, despite the challenges posed by COVID-19, policy effectiveness has not decreased significantly. This is quite a positive sign. And second, there has been slight increase in vulnerability. However, it is not entirely clear whether this is legitimate or not. So moving on, the program is heavily reliant on the national budget for its funding. It is important to recognize this dependency. Lastly, achieving fiscal autonomy is really crucial for ensuring the long-term sustainability for this program. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. So, right, so one more point to consider is the potential relationship between the big budget cut and the new political regime. Although the timing doesn't perfectly align, it's worth noting that President Yoon was elected around the time the new adaptation measures were being planned. So I'd like to draw your attention to these Korean articles here, which reveal that the Yoon administration has actually cut around 800 million Korean won from the carbon neutrality budget. So this is a quote highlights a bit of dilemma that public infrastructure planners face when developing climate change adaptation policies. This quote is taken from a document originating in Jeonnam. quote, the project's ability to introduce new initiatives and make progress is heavily dependent on national funds, which can create challenges in terms of implementation. Additionally, changes in government policies can result in reduced support, making it even more difficult to promote new projects and initiatives. This is an important piece of information to consider when examining the overall situation and trying to understand the reasons behind the budget cuts we've been discussing. It's definitely food for thought as we continue our analysis. So finally, the conclusion. Dynamics are indeed present within CIS framework and local ordinances. However, the system remains hierarchical within each region, lacking natural infrastructure and resource users in the system. And nonetheless, the rules and rules were completely different. Instead of hierarchy within each region, the larger hierarchy exists at the national level outside of the region. It seems that the more financially independent a region is from the central government, the easier it is for them to establish their own climate change policies. So in conclusion, our research had shed light on the complexities and dynamics of climate change adaptation policy in South Korea. By examining the interaction between CIS and IG, we've been able to uncover the underlying relationship hierarchies that impact policymaking at both the regional and national levels. This understanding can help inform future efforts to design more effective, adaptive, and resilient policies in the face of ongoing climate crisis. I want you to thank you all of your attention, and I hope that our findings have provided valuable insights to you, all of you, and I look forward to hearing from your thoughts you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sola. Excellent presentation. So I'm opening the floor for questions for Sola. You can either chime in or there. Dan, go ahead.
Thank you. Very interesting research. And I just had a couple, my Zoom dropped out for a minute, so I might have missed something on this one. But I saw your research question. Did you list any hypotheses that you're testing, and did those actually, did the findings support those hypotheses? I think I might have missed your hypotheses.
Oh, yeah. My hypothesis, it's more like research question, was like how different environmental and policy structure, how to say, like, I mean, in different region, but similar political environments, how they adapt to climate change much more. Mm-hmm. And it was quite different when we look into the rules in form with IG and CIS. Mm-hmm. But actual budget allocations or those kind of political things were very impactful to adapt to climate change issues, pretty much. So, yeah.
And just a second question. Thanks for that. I noticed so your network analysis in each region showed that it was very hierarchical with regards to the governor, and then in one instance you had the mayor as the hierarchy, kind of the central figure. In your findings, you know that the national hierarchy trumped or is more significant than the regional hierarchy. Did you do an analysis where it showed like a national entity that kind of like in your regional network analyses, you had the governors and the mayor, but what was the national node in that one, in those different analyses?
Yeah, I think your question is very, very important one. I think, because with the help of IG and CIS, I could describe the hierarchy within each local ordinances. Mm-hmm. but I can do IG and CIS with the Framework Act and Decree, but it is, as I expect, it would not be, it would not show the very important differences between among each region and among the actors in CIS framework. The reason why is that it's already made by the central government. So it is highly unlikely to show their hierarchies on their own. But that's my, but I assume only, but I can try maybe later, but so yeah.
Oh, cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Very good presentation. I loved it.
Thank you.
Saba?
Thanks for your presentation, Sola. I had a question about the coding of the translation. So you had mentioned that in order to facilitate this analysis, you had to use the English translations. And I recall from the workshop last year that there was some difficulty in this and that the translations did not always capture the intent of what was written in Korean. So did you encounter any difficulties in that, and how did you manage that, if so?
Okay, I can talk about this maybe 7 days or oh yeah, it was not easy at all. So that's why it was very hard to get a new coder who are very fluent in English and Korean and who knows the the IG coding variant, institutional listings, etc. So that's why I did test and retest method from Dr. Brady. And there are nuance that Korean catch, but other non-Korean speaker cannot catch some. But I cannot explain how to how different it is. But I got advice from linguistics, PhD linguistics student, and she said this is something like that, and then you need to solve this problem like this. And if you want, I can share this my dilemma that I faced in my paper. Yeah, but one big thing was the deontic components, because shell endeavor is totally different.
Right.
Yeah, and also in the legal context as well. So yeah.
That shall endeavor phrase just is a real pain. And it seems it's used in all languages.
So yeah, I was really struggling with shell endeavor is much stronger, or may is much stronger. Anyway, it is shell, so it might be strong, but compared to may or can, I'm not sure. Like many dilemmas here. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions for Sola? Dan and Adela, or Adela, do you want to go first and then Dan? Okay.
Yeah, I found this presentation really interesting, so thank you. And I was wondering maybe about future work. So you found that financing and financial resources were important. And I was wondering if the different regions differ in the authority that they have granted to them to raise their own financial resources, or are they strictly dependent on the central government? But then also I was wondering what goes along with financial resources. Are those associated with other types of resources that can support or limit autonomy of these regions and their decision making? And so what do you, and what are your plans moving forward? Are you going to take this in additional directions?
Okay. Thank you for your question so much. Yeah, I'm still struggling with my discussion part so far. Financial resource may originate from many diverse resources, but unfortunately, as far as I read the policy documents, only I couldn't figure out what other sources would be possible because they only describe the national fund and local fund, and that's all. So maybe we should look into another some budget allocation rules much more, but so far that's the limitation. Yes, I understand. And what was the second question? What's that? Yeah,
That's a good question. Oh, what are there authorities that are related to financial capacity?
oh yeah, it's quite complex. The ministry, like central government, can allocate their budget to the local government. Also, ministry level can do this. Also, other research institutes can do this. So it is hard to delineate their complex or with policy documents only. Yeah.
Does that answer your questions, Adela? Okay. Dan, do you mind if I let Adam go first and then call on
No,
you?
not at
Is that
all. I was
okay?
actually gonna suggest that.
Adam, go ahead.
Hey, Sola, great job. I really liked how you used the CIS to visualize the action verbs and the IG statements. That was really cool across the 5 provinces there. Generated a lot of questions based on those comparisons, but I think the first one that jumped out to me was that, and apologies for my Korean, but is it Jeonnam, or they seem to be the only province that had active feedback institutionalized from the PI and resource users back to public infrastructure providers, as opposed to just kind of a open one-way obligation from the PIP that the other provinces seem to have. And I was wondering if perhaps some of that is just because of the hierarchical institutional climate of South Korea, or if perhaps from your discussion, as you pointed out, this is because Jeonnam has had to develop more feedback, which then related to more responsiveness, or perhaps, I don't know if you had some kind of story to tell about how those institutions evolved to fit the natural and social economic context.
Yeah, I think thank you for your feedback, and your Korean is good. Jeonnam is, as you saw, it's the southern area of South Korea. Even though we're in the south, it's very, very south area, and it includes a lot of islands that the map cannot describe. So, and as far as I know, they are very liberal compared to the other regions, and they are very highly affected by the climate change effect. On the maybe first slide that in the background section, I showed you the drought picture happening in South Korea. It is that area in Jeonnam, and people had to suffer from a water shortage for over a year. And so I think this local ordinances very reflect these dilemmas that much, but as far as I hope, maybe they might try to struggle with some climate change on their own, but they are very dependent upon the national funds still. So we are not, we cannot guarantee at all for these things, but yeah, And yeah, also Korean local ordinances are not actually very important at all compared to act or decree, because if act or decree changed, local ordinances had to change. So it follows the framework and decree so much. So it is very dependent within the rules in form as per se. So yeah, it's still a complex issue. Yeah.
Dan? Thanks for waiting.
No problem. So this might be outside the scope of the research project, but I think you kind of touched on it a little bit on that last answer. But since all these regions or provinces are what's the word? they connect to each other. Man, it's early here in Colorado too. But this idea that they border each other, are there any overlapping authorities? So you did it region by region, but it seems like, especially with climate change adaptation, is there any cooperative action between the different province or regional governments? Or if it's hierarchical with the national government, do they force cooperation among the regions? Did you find that at all when you coded?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, I found those kind of cooperation related things with other local government or other international local government or non-profit organization. There is actually article about that, but I'm not sure it is very active or not yet. And compared to the United States is like a federal, a nation. But compared to that, South Korea started their self some kind of local government things less than 20 years. So it is still very hierarchical. So yeah, there might be some background, history of that. Still, yeah, very dependent upon the central government. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Sola. We're out of time, unfortunately. Thanks, Sola, for the super interesting presentation. It's good to see how much your work has advanced since we talked last year in the grad student workshop, and excited to see how this further develops. But thank you, everybody, for being here and for engaging in this interesting presentation. And we'll see you again in June. On June 6th is our next presentation. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.